Good evening, everybody. Today is Thursday, March 12th, 2026. This is the time and place for the Mount Lebanon Zoning Hearing Board, appeal number 1872 for Castlegate Green LLC with applicant Douglas Devlin of Devlin Architecture. I guess at this time, please stand and we'll get you sworn in.
I do.
Okay. Included in our packet today, we have the appeal cover sheet, a letter prepared by the applicant to Mr. Sarver addressing the 5 criteria for a variance. We have the zoning hearing board application, a colored rendering of a sign, a 11 by 17 site plan prepared by Common Ground, dated September 21, 2021. I have a full-size copy of that same plan, a copy of the agenda of the newspaper article, the public notice, and color photographs taken by the municipality. So I guess at this time, if you want to approach and give your testimony.
Thank you all for the opportunity. I stepped into this process late. Community Builders is the developer of Castlegate Green that has been occupied, I think, for 3, maybe 4 years.
I think it's only been 2 years
Since they got occupancy, but
Correct.
I think initially they got their permit or whatever 4 years ago and started the
approvals and
application
development
process
years.
and then withheld it. And so I'm not the architect of the project. I was recommended to represent Community Builders by a consultant that they've used, former employee, who knew that I had my business here in Mount Lebanon and thought I would be the one that should carry the load on this for them, having been through this process here before. So generally speaking, I mean, you know, we have an 8-building project of affordable housing. It's a tax credit licked, federally funded project. And the zoning ordinance, I think there was a variance or a zoning change to get that use of that particular site. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rodney, please, but given it was a multifamily site.
I believe that's correct. So I believe that the site was approved as developed, put it that way.
Yeah, so however, there was no provision in the ordinance for a sign to identify the project. And there's provisions for individual building signs that you can put that are small on the individual buildings to identify them, their number and letter and so forth. But there was no opportunity in the ordinance to provide a sign that is actually required by the federal funding sources. And there's the main components of the sign and this is with every LICT project nationally that, and I've done a few of these myself through my office. You always need to identify the project, say it's fair housing and equal opportunity and identify that on the signage itself. And so we're applying for a variance for a directional and instructional sign. And I put in red on the description addressing the 5 criteria, the arguments that, I feel can justify the variance. And in summary, number one is kind of, there's not much to say about it in that is there unique physical circumstances or conditions that would prohibit compliance. There isn't, but because we can comply with the sign if we're allowed to do it, but so that's really not much of an issue. Number two is really the biggest thing in terms of motivating the variance, other than it, given that the number of units, the number of people, there's obviously turnover in a rental project. There's people that need, the visitors that go there, and there's really no wayfinding other than, building numbers off the street to say that this is Castlegate Green. So, and then one of the problems is that the syndicators withhold certain funds for a final closing until you comply with every check box that is in the package for affordable housing. And so they want to close this project out after 2 years post-occupancy and get in full compliance with all of the tax credit requirements that ended up funding the project to begin with. So so they're under contractual requirements with the tax credits, and so it can put a portion. I'm not saying that it is. I don't know all the specifics of the financing, but I know from having done these projects that it can put some of the tax credits at jeopardy, and as I mentioned in here, it can lead to clawbacks and partial repeal. And then that affects rents and everything else. It's a very complicated formula on how they control all of this for the benefit of lowering rents. Number three, the unnecessary hardship has not been created by the appellant. I guess that's what we're asking for a favorable interpretation on. The developer couldn't get the issue resolved before they got the project permitted without the sign, but they're asking, they need to have the sign. So I guess we're asking for some relief there, given that they didn't have a choice for compliance with competing regulatory authorities with different requirements. The number four is, given the scale of the project and, how big the buildings are relative to the rest of the neighborhood, and the amount of space, the green space that is available, we really don't think it's going to affect the character of the neighborhood negatively or impair any impact. It will have no impacts on adjacent property in terms of use. It would be detrimental to public welfare. And then number five, this is the absolute minimum requirement to afford relief. We just want the basics that basically says this is what this project is, complies with fair housing and ADA, and that's it. So I indicated a location on the site plan that you have on that 11 by 17 that shows approximately where a freestanding sign would go. Now they had a seat wall. They had an original sign design that had a brick seat wall with two brick columns on the side that was nesting the sign. That was not in compliance as a design with the ordinance, because the ordinance clearly states that you have just two aluminum posts that support such a sign that's limited to 12 square feet. And that's what I showed in the application. They started construction on that structure, and I think They actually built the seat wall, which is a landscape element, can be viewed as a landscape element without a sign. I don't think there's any prohibition on that, but they built the seat wall, but they didn't build the framing columns on it. So, there was a question about whether or not we could put the sign on top of that at the same height and just cut the legs and put it on the seat wall. However, I showed it freestanding at the entry, closer to the entry. And there was also the question of where, if we put the sign where the seat wall is that considered an internal sign, which would have another hoop to jump through in terms of the variances?
An internal sign, I didn't get your language after that.
Well, if you look on the site plan, the wall, and it's not, I didn't highlight it.
I know where the wall.
Okay, you know where it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's inside of the project. After somebody's turned in and they've already entered the project, the sign is on the interior of the development. And so the question is, would that have been considered an internal sign that we would have applied for a variance for, which my understanding would have been, less likely to get approved. So I proposed a new location out near the entrance, which is clearly giving people direction and identity to the project, and that's pretty much it.
Mr. Conti, any questions for me?
Can Rodney give us what history he knows on this?
We could go to that. So I guess, Mr. Sarver, what is the municipality's stance?
So Mr. Devlin approached the municipality, myself, concerning signage for this property. And there was some conversation even prior to Mr. Devlin's involvement with signage. And we discussed various types of signage, including neighborhood signs, internal signs, and it didn't quite fit those definitions the way that it was being proposed at that time. And through some conversation, there's that section in the ordinance, the 823.5.1.2, which says instructional or directional signs not exceeding 12 square feet in area only for uses authorized as a conditional use or a special exceptions. Well, this was an approved use. It was a use by right. So the sign, if it was approved through a special use exception or a conditional use, the sign would be allowed. However, this project is a use by right. So by the ordinance, it doesn't allow such a sign. But when you read the definition of an internal or directional sign, it says a sign conveying instructions or directions with respect to the use of the premise or a portion of the premise on which it is maintained, or the use or practice being conducted on the premises, or directional, informational, or public service signs, such as those advertising availability of restrooms, conveniences, and street address numbers. So through conversation, their intent, it fits better with the definition of an instructional and directional sign. However, it's not permitted by the ordinance because this is a use by right and not a conditional use or special exception. So the size is 12 square feet as they proposed. And so after conversations with Mr. Devlin, that's the approach that they took after looking at internal signs, because the internal sign is mainly only to be viewed internally in the project. But the way that they approached it with the wall, as you come straight in, you could see it from outside the project. So it didn't really fit within that. And because it wasn't a designated neighborhood on the neighborhood map, they couldn't go with the neighborhood signage. So this is where it best fit with the least amount of modification to the ordinance. So, Mr. Devlin applied for the variance, in order to obtain, a sign permit for it.
Okay. And has the commissioners or municipality provided any stance?
No.
Conti, any questions for the applicant or Mr. Sarver?
Yeah, I guess when the planning board approved this, which they had to do,
Right.
did the sign issue come up at all during the planning board meetings
Not
process?
to my knowledge.
I can't contribute to that.
Nobody
I
knows.
have no history of the
Okay,
project back then.
because if it was going to be treated as a conditional use to put a sign in, and it could have been, that was their area of responsibility, not ours. We don't decide a conditional use, they do.
Well, but it
And they
didn't
could
need a
have-
conditional use is my point.
To develop the whole thing,
They did not need a conditional use.
I understand that. But the sign could have been treated independently that way, but nobody knows what happened at the planning meetings.
Yeah, I was not at those meetings.
Yeah, okay. Are these Mount Lebanon streets, this Castlegate Court, the Loop, is that a Mount Lebanon street?
They are private streets.
That's a private street.
Correct.
Does the sign ordinance apply to the side of a building on a private street?
When you say side of building,
Or side of the building, or on that thing that was built to hold the sign? I mean, does our sign ordinance apply when you're on a private street?
it doesn't matter with the street, it matters for the zoning of the property. So as you look at the
Okay.
authorized signs under 823.5, it says authorized signs in an R1, R2, R3, R4, and R5 districts, and residential uses in transitional areas and in planned residential developments are as followed. So it basically allows these types of signage, which it allows the instructional. But again, the condition on the instructional and directional signs is that it's limited to only those uses authorized under a conditional use or special exception. They could put building signs on each building of 2 square feet. So they have 8 buildings. If they put 2 square feet on each building, they could essentially get 16 square feet of signage. What they're proposing is just 12,
Yeah, yeah.
and more centrally located so that the complex can be identified.
Yeah. Has anybody received any notice from the funding agency that there's a problem vis-à-vis the sign, since the locality requires a variance for it? And
Well, I wouldn't be here had they not had an issue with their,
has the issue been raised?
yeah, but I don't have that documentation from, whether it's the state.
Who usually wins out when there's a difference with the local ordinances?
I don't know. I mean, I've
You
never
ever had
encountered
any
this. I mean, this is,
experience with
I've
that?
never had, I can tell you I've done 20 of these projects.
Yeah,
And I've never had an issue trying to get a sign that just says what the project is in any municipality. I mean, that's just, I think it's just a little glitch in the ordinance that, it caught everybody by surprise, to be honest with you. I mean, it's, while the ordinance would allow us 2 square feet on every building, I mean, we're not gonna get the name and everything
Yeah.
on that, and.
yeah. I just am wondering about that brick sign, that brick thing that was built and has a cap on it and is right at the entrance. Why couldn't they put a sign there?
Because they started that construction without any approvals or permits, and we stopped them.
I see, we stopped them from putting the
Because
sign
they
there.
assumed that they could have a sign.
Yeah,
So they started the construction of it, and that was, I'm gonna say, a good year and a half ago.
yeah,
And like I said, through various conversations, even before Mr. Devlin got involved, there was some question about approval of some type of signage for the
Yeah.
property.
Yeah,
So that wall's been there, but like Mr. Devlin said, there's no prohibition of constructing an above-ground wall with nothing on it, that size. So they just chose not to,
the wall with nothing on it is there,
right.
and it would be a great place for a sign.
I agree, but
Is there any way that the sign could be accommodated to that structure?
it can,
Yeah, they could simply just mount the posts. They could cut the post shorter and just mount the post right to the top of the wall. I mean, you just epoxy a couple boards in there and then
I don't know
it's
if they
done.
can put the sign cabinet on the wall. I don't know what the size of that wall is, because again,
It's a masonry wall that's,
Right.
it's a couple,
It's about 7 feet,
Yeah.
maybe 4 feet high at the most.
it's the ideal place for it, but
Yeah.
I was afraid to put it on as the location because I knew the wall was, they started it, they didn't have the sign permit for that.
Yeah.
And then they modified the construction so it wouldn't be a problem and and so I played it safe with where I was proposing it because that clearly meets the design criteria for any of the signs that we've been discussing. But ideally, if you look at the page where the sign is showing there, the sign design here, this is not my drawing, this is from the G Graphics 22 signs. There's
Yeah, I see it here.
that represents the top of the wall, that gray line. So we could just cut the bottom off of each side post and the sign's at the same height, it works, and we could just put a plate on the bottom of the post, mount it to the top of that wall, and it's all kind of integrated together. It actually puts the sign further off the street, which is less of an impact for the neighbors, although
I'll tell you what my thought was driving around there. You've got some substantial institutions like the Catholic High School, Seton LaSalle there. You've got that, what is it, Brookdale or Barkdale, or what's the name of the?
Brookdale.
Brookdale? Barkdale? Anybody remember?
I can't.
It's a major and fairly luxury home for seniors.
It's a senior home, yeah.
Right down the street from
Right.
it. And these guys all have whatever zone they're in, whatever planning, approvals or zoning approvals they got historically, I don't know. But they all have substantial signs. And here we have in Mount Lebanon kind of a first ever federally subsidized housing development. And we give it a sign on 2 sticks. And the sign on 2 sticks is right next to all these big fancy signs like the other places have. I would rather see our first ever subsidized housing project have a substantial sign that fitted in with the institutions, the other institutions up there. And
I don't disagree, but that's a much bigger ask in terms of, the provisions in the ordinance. So, we were trying to keep it, like the point number 5 said, it's the minimal,
there's
it's
no.
the minimal
yeah,
possible to get it done.
There's no easy way to put the sign there on that wall.
again, they were proposing it out front. The
Yeah.
only other objection to that would be under allowed signs in the general sign regulations, under 823.2, it talks about directional signs not exceeding 3 feet in height. So putting it on the face of the wall would be better, in my opinion, as the zoning officer,
Yeah,
to be more in compliant with a directional sign, since
Yeah.
you're looking at it as a directional / And
Well-
I believe the point of this is it says top of planter box. So I don't know if there was a planter box in
And
front.
that, it really, there was a mistype, it was a typo, it really should have said top of wall. That was a,
Would the developer be okay with a more substantial wall, or I'm sorry, more substantial sign on the wall, as Mr. Conte is kind of describing?
I think the developer would be happy with anything right now to get them in compliance with their financial partners and getting final closing and getting the retention released for the final bid funds, yes.
I mean, look, it's an attractive sign, but my thought is it looks like we're short-selling the development itself when you put it in context with the other things around it.
I don't disagree with the sentiment.
Right, the only disagreement that I have with that is that it was advertised as basically a variance from that section to allow it
Yeah.
in a use by right, not the type of sign or size of sign.
Okay.
My question is about the neighborhood sign. Is neighborhood defined in a specific way that couldn't be considered a neighborhood?
Yes. If you look at the back of the zoning ordinance, there's actually a map of the designated neighborhoods.
Okay.
And obviously, I probably don't have it here. But it's more of the residential neighborhood districts. So because it's not a designated neighborhood by ordinance, that it doesn't qualify for a neighborhood identification.
Like Mission Hills. Or-
Right.
I asked that same question.
Yeah, originally that was the goal and try to interpret it that way. But unfortunately, it didn't meet the definition of that designated neighborhood. It's more of like a development identification sign rather than a neighborhood.
Is there anything that prevents it from looking like the Mission Hills sign?
No, I just think that, I didn't have any input as to the sign design,
Okay.
I'm just carrying this through the process to see what's most reasonable and what had the highest chance of getting through. And anything that I would push beyond the essential minimum was gonna, in my mind, decrease our odds of success.
Does the sign as proposed, does that meet or comply with the minimum federal requirements?
Yeah, that's all they require. It's really pretty simple. So.
And then I guess, it sounds like the only justification for the sign so far is if you do not put it in, then that's not compliant with the federal funding requirements, and therefore there'll be, I guess, a financial impact to the developer.
Yes, in addition to the project has no name in terms of the general public.
So that was going to be where I was leading to. So with no sign, would there be a safety impact or issue with not having adequate signing for first responders?
I don't know if I can answer that question completely, because I know first responders have their own mapping and their identification for getting to certain properties. But certainly if the sign is there and it says where it is, and it's somebody calls in and says, I'm in Castlegate Green, and the sign is out on the street, That's not going to hurt public safety. In fact, it's an enhancement, I would think. But I can't say whether or not they have their own special coding for finding addresses, irrespective of the sign.
Okay, thank you. Is Mr. Chianti, any further questions?
No, and in that regard, I was going to mention the perpendicular street is Castlegate. So,
Ms. Farmer?
No, other than, the alternate solution would be these signs on every single building, and that would make it federally compliant?
Not really,
Okay,
because in 2 square feet, you got to get the name.
yeah,
You're going to have redundant signs with the same information. And then what that's going to do is preclude us from putting, say, building A, units 5 through 10, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, which is what those individual smaller building signs really serve.
yeah, I mean, they could meet the requirements simply by putting a sign on the administration building, which is centrally located.
I don't think
they
they're
not?
allowed to do anything more than the 2 square feet, though,
Correct.
even on that building. So it's so minimal that
Yeah.
it really, to get,
Well, I'm not arguing for it, I'm just
Yeah.
suggesting that they could minimally meet the requirements. Which
I'd
is,
have to go back and look at
you
that.
know, one of the things we are supposed to consider. Anyway, I'm done.
All right. Mr. Sarver, is there anybody online?
There looks to be one person online. If you would like to speak tonight, could you raise your hand, please?
There are no further questions. We could enter executive session. Okay, we could pause the record for now.
Change the settings on here. I don't know how to pause it.
Okay,
If
we
I
could,
could make a matter of record,
sure.
as I went to pause it, I noticed that there was a hand raised from the online caller, and as soon as I noticed it, they got offline. So I don't know who it was, so I just think I should make it a matter of record that somebody did try to get our attention, but unfortunately, they disconnected.
Okay, they are currently not online?
They are not.
Okay. And we're back on record. So at this time, we are prepared to vote. Mr. Chianti, how do you vote?
I'll vote to approve the variance.
Ms. Farmer?
vote to approve the variance.
As do I, vote to approve.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the fast decision.
Thank you.
You have to wait that 45 days.
And this concludes our hearing today. We could go off record. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out.
I'm just going to give you this.
So now I gotta apply, I gotta get you the permit, right, Ronnie?
Is that how it, okay.
I mean, you